You saved me. By tribal law, I give you my body. Apache girl to rancher. The sun was still low in the sky when the rancher stepped out of his small wooden house and looked across the wide open land that stretched as far as his eyes could see. The morning air was cool, and a thin layer of dust clung to his boots as he walked toward the fence line. His name was Jack, and he had lived alone on this land for many years. The ranch was not large, but it was enough to keep him busy and give him a quiet life far from towns and crowds. Jack liked the silence. The only sounds he usually heard were the wind moving through dry grass, the soft steps of his horses, and the distant call of birds. Each day followed a simple pattern. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and repaired whatever the desert in time had worn down. Life was hard, but it was honest, and that was enough for him. That morning he noticed something different. One of his horses lifted its head and snorted, ears pointed toward the hills beyond the far edge of his land. Jack followed the horse's gaze. At first, he saw nothing but rocks and sand. Then, a small shape moved between the tall grass. Jack narrowed his eyes. He was not the kind of man who liked surprises. Living near the edge of tribal lands meant he always had to stay alert. Sometimes travelers passed through, and sometimes trouble did too. He rested his hand on the fence and watched closely. The shape stumbled forward and fell to the ground. Jack hesitated. His first thought was to turn back and stay out of it. Helping strangers in this part of the land often led to problems. But something in the way the figure fell made his chest tighten. It did not look like someone simply tired from walking. It looked like someone running out of strength. He climbed over the fence and walked toward the fallen person, slow and careful. As he got closer, he saw that it was a young girl. She could not have been more than 16 or 17. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her dark hair hung loose around her face. He glances around in despair. Her chest moved up and down quickly as she struggled to breathe. Jack knelt beside her. "Hey," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, voracious. They were wide with fear. She tried to sit up, but her body failed her, and she fell back into the grass. "Easy," Jack said. "You're safe here." The word safe did not seem to reach her. Fast, she looked past him, toward the hills, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Jack followed her gaze, but the land remained quiet. He stood and looked around, scanning the open space. Nothing moved. The wind carried only dust and the sound of distant birds. When he looked back at the girl, he saw tears slip down her cheeks. Jack made a decision. He carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, thin and weak from hunger or fear, or both. He carried her back toward the ranch, moving as fast as he could without making her uncomfortable. He took her into the barn first. It was cool inside, shaded from the sun. He laid her down on a pile of clean hay and brought her a cup of water from the pump outside. She drank slowly, hands shaking. "My name is Jack," he said. "You're on my land." "No, one will bother you here." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tala."
Jack nodded.
"All right, Tala." He noticed marks on her arms and dirt on her knees, signs of someone who had been running for a long time. He wanted to ask questions, but he could see she was not ready to talk. He left her for a few minutes and returned with some bread and dried meat. She ate carefully. like someone who was not used to having enough food. While she ate, Jack sat on a stool nearby and kept watch through the open barn door. The land still looked calm, but he did not relax. Later that day, Tala finally found enough strength to stand. She walked slowly around the barn, touching the wooden walls and the tools hanging from hooks, as if trying to understand where she was. Jack showed her the small room near the barn where he stored extra blankets. "You can sleep here," he said. "It's warmer than the hay." She nodded, her eyes still cautious but no longer as wild with fear. As the sun began to set, the sky turned orange and red. Jack went outside to bring in the animals for the night. When he returned, he found Tala sitting on the edge of the blanket, staring at her hands. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently. She shook her head. Jack did not push. "That's fine. You don't have to." Breath. The night grew quiet. The stars came out one by one, filling the dark sky. Jack sat on the steps of his house, listening to the world settle down. He knew helping Tala might bring trouble. If someone was looking for her, they might come to his land. He also knew that turning her away would have been easier. But as he thought about the fear in her eyes, he knew he had done the right thing. Later, he brought her a lantern and showed her how to use it. "If you hear anything or need me, come to the house," he said. She nodded again. That night, Jack did not sleep well. Every sound made him sit up, listening. The wind brushing against the walls, the horses shifting in their stalls, even the call of an owl in the distance. Near midnight, he thought he heard voices far away. He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The land was dark, but the moon gave just enough light to see the hills. He stood there for a long time, heart beating fast. The voices did not come closer. He went back inside, but he knew this was not over. The next morning, Tala helped him feed the animals. She moved quietly, watching him, and copying what he did. She still did not talk much, but she seemed calmer. Jack noticed that she flinched whenever a loud sound came from the distance. He guessed that whatever she had run from still lived in her mind. As the day went on, he taught her small things about the ranch. How to draw water from the pump. How to tie the rope on the fence. Simple tasks, but they gave her something to focus on. In the afternoon, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Dusk. Jack froze. He shaded his eyes and looked closer. Shapes moved inside the dust. Horses. Tala saw it too. Her face went pale, and she stepped back, her hand gripping the edge of the barn door. Jack moved in front of her without thinking. The riders were still far away, but they were coming in his direction. Jack felt the weight of the choice he had made the day before. He could tell Tala to run, break. He could send her back into the land she had escaped. Instead, he turned to her. "Stay here," he said. "Don't make a sound." She nodded, fear filling her eyes again. Jack stepped out into the open and waited. The riders came closer, their faces still hard to see. The wind carried the sound of hooves and low voices. Jack stood tall, his hands at his sides. But he did not know what he would say when they reached him. He did not know if words would even matter. Breath. All he knew was that the girl behind him had come to his land seeking safety. The sound of hooves grew louder as the riders approached, their shadows stretching long across the barren land. Jack didn't move, his feet firmly planted in the dirt as he watched them draw closer. His heart beat steadily in his chest, each thud a reminder of the decision he had made the day before. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The riders were now within 100 yards of him. their faces slowly becoming clearer in the daylight. There were 5 of them, all mounted on sturdy horses, their clothes a mix of worn leathers and beads. They weren't the typical travelers Jack had encountered in the past. These men carried an air of authority, like hunters or warriors, not farmers or traders. Jack could see the leader of the group clearly now. A tall man with long black hair, his face set in a serious expression. His eyes were sharp, scanning the land as he rode, and when they landed on Jack, they narrowed. The man pulled his horse to a halt a few feet away from Jack, and the others followed suit. They stopped, their horses' hooves stirring up small clouds of dust in the still air. "Who are you?" the leader asked, his voice deep and commanding. "And what are you doing here?" Jack straightened, keeping his posture relaxed but steady. "I'm Jack McAllister." "I own this land," he said calmly, meeting the man's gaze. "I've been living here for years. Nothing strange going on." The leader's eyes flicked toward the barn, and Jack knew what was coming. He had expected this moment for a while now, but still, he couldn't shake the knot that formed in his stomach. "I saw your land, but I don't think it's just this land that brought us here," the leader said, his tone hardening. "You're hiding something." Jack took a deep breath. "What do you mean?" The leader gestured toward the barn. "We know a girl ran from our people." Bang! "The one who left our tribe. She's here, isn't she?" Jack's mind raced, but his face remained calm. The last thing he wanted was for Tala to be dragged back to the life she had been running from. He had promised to protect her, and that meant facing whatever came next. "He's not here," Jack said, his voice steady but firm. He hoped the lie would be enough. But the leader's eyes were sharp, and he saw through the lie immediately. "Don't play games with me, rancher. We know she's here. We've been tracking her for days." "It's only a matter of time before we find her." Jack stood his ground. "You've got no right to come on my land and accuse me of harboring anyone." The leader dismounted from his horse, his boots landing heavily on the ground. He took a few steps toward Jack, his gaze never leaving him. The air between them thickened, and the other men followed their leader's lead, dismounting as well and forming a loose circle around Jack. "You're a fool if you think we'll just walk away," the leader said coldly. "That girl has broken tribal law. She needs to answer for what she did. We'll take her back whether you like it or not." Jack's hands clenched at his sides, and he couldn't let them take her. Not after everything she had been through. Not after the trust she had placed in him.
He glanced over his shoulder toward the barn, where Tala was no doubt listening, terrified of what might happen next.
"I won't let you take her," Jack said, his voice rising slightly. "She's under my protection now." "I'm not giving her up." The leader didn't seem surprised by Jack's response. In fact, it looked like he had been expecting it. He nodded to one of the men beside him, who stepped forward, pulling out a long coil of rope. "You don't have a choice, rancher. If you stand in our way, you'll regret it." Jack's pulse quickened. He wasn't a fighter by nature, but he had worked with his hands for years. He knew how to defend himself if he had to, but he also knew that a confrontation with these men would only bring more danger to both him and Tala. He had to think fast. "You want her so badly," Jack said, his mind racing. "Then you'll have to get past me." The leader stared at him, a flicker of something, amusement or irritation, flashing in his eyes. "You don't know what you're dealing with, rancher." "We've got the law on our side." Jack's eyes narrowed. I don't care about your law.
I care about what's right.
The tension in the air seemed to stretch for an eternity. The other men stood still, waiting for a signal from their leader. Breaks. Jack's heart pounded, but he kept his stance steady. He wasn't about to back down. Then, as if sensing the standoff might go nowhere, the leader let out a long breath and looked around. "You're a stubborn one," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "But you're not going to win, I can promise you that." Jack didn't flinch. "We'll see about that." The leader took a step back, signaling to his men. They didn't advance, but Jack could tell they were just waiting for an excuse to escalate things further. He needed to buy more time. He needed to think of a way to get Tala to safety.
"I'll tell you this," the leader said, his voice cold again. "We'll come back tomorrow."
If she's not here, then we'll leave you alone. But if she is, there will be consequences.
For you. For her. With that, he mounted his horse again, the rest of his men following suit. As they turned to ride away, Jack felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it didn't last long. He knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jack turned back to the barn, his thoughts already racing ahead. Tala had to leave. There was no other choice now. The riders would return the next day, and Jack wasn't sure if he could protect her again.
Inside the barn, Tala was waiting, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear.
She had heard everything.
"They'll be back tomorrow," Jack said quietly, closing the distance between them.
You need to leave, Tala. You can't stay here anymore.
But it's not safe. Tala shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes.
But I don't know where to go. I'll help you, Jack interrupted gently. I'll make sure you're safe. But we don't have much time. We have to act fast. Tala looked at him, her expression torn. She didn't want to leave, but she knew Jack was right. The men would not stop coming for her. She was no longer just a runaway girl. She was a symbol of defiance, and in a world like this, symbols were dangerous. "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "But I'll figure something out. You won't be alone."
They shared a quiet moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Jack knew what he had to do.
He had to get her out of here before the riders returned. But the question was, how? The sun had already begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land when Jack and Tala sat in the dim light of the barn, contemplating their next move. The threat of the riders still hung in the air, and time seemed to be slipping away faster than they could handle. Jack could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had promised Tala that he would keep her safe, but the situation was growing more dangerous by the minute. Tala sat quietly, her fingers nervously twirling a loose strand of hay. Psst. She hadn't said much since the riders had left, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She was strong, no doubt about it, but this was a fear unlike anything she had experienced before. The kind of fear that came when you realized that your fate was no longer in your hands. "We need to leave tonight," Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, but there was a trace of uncertainty in it. He didn't know where they would go or how they would escape, but staying here wasn't an option anymore. Tala looked up at him, her expression softening.
"But where will I go?"
"I can't just leave everything behind." Jack sighed. This place meant to her. How she had struggled to escape from her past. The ranch had become a place of safety for her, even if it was temporary. It had given her a sense of peace, something she hadn't known for a long time. "I don't have all the answers, Tala," Jack said, his voice gentle. "But I do know that staying here will only put you in more danger." Breath. "The men who came today, they won't stop. They'll come back, and next time they won't leave without you." "Ah," Tala nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. She had no choice but to listen to Jack. Specifically, he was the only one who had shown her kindness, the only one who had given her a place to hide. The thought of leaving the only safety she had known was terrifying. But she knew Jack was right. If they stayed here, there was no telling what might happen. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I know I can't stay."
Jack reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to go alone."
"I'll help you." Tala's eyes filled with gratitude, but she couldn't shake the feeling of fear that had settled deep in her chest. She didn't know where they would go or what dangers lay ahead. The world beyond the ranch was a place she didn't fully understand, a place that had treated her cruelly in the past. "I don't know where to go," she said softly. "I don't even know where I'd be safe." Jack thought for a moment. He had spent most of his life on this land, and he knew every corner of it. But he also knew that the world outside was much bigger than what he had experienced. He wasn't sure where they could hide, but there had to be a place. "There had to be somewhere! There's a small town a few days' ride from here," Jack said, his voice thoughtful. "It's far enough away that it might be hard for them to find us, but it's not a perfect solution. It's just a place to get us started." Tala looked at him, her expression skeptical. "A town? How can I hide in a town?" Jack shrugged. "We'll figure it out. It's a chance, and right now, it's the only one we have." Tala didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her hands, trying to steady her thoughts. The uncertainty of it all was overwhelming. How could she trust a town? Could she trust Jack to lead her somewhere safe? Jack could sense her hesitation, and he understood it. He was taking a risk too, putting his own life on the line for a girl he barely knew. But something about her had drawn him in. He couldn't stand by and watch her be dragged back into a life of suffering. He had to help her, no matter the cost. "We'll leave tonight while it's still dark," Jack said, his voice steady. "We'll head for the town, and we'll stay low. We can take the back trails, avoid the main roads. They won't be able to track us if we're careful." Tala nodded slowly, the reality of what they were about to do settling in. She was about to leave everything she knew behind, her past, her history, and everything that had come with it. But she also knew that there was no turning back now. If she stayed, she would be lost.
"I'll pack some things," Tala said, standing up.
"But I don't know what to bring." Jack stood as well, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll keep it simple."
Just enough to get by. We can't carry too much if we're trying to stay hidden."
Tala disappeared into the small room Jack had shown her earlier, gathering what little she had. A few changes of clothes, some small personal items she had kept close over the years. Jack did the same, gathering a couple of blankets, a few tools, and some food they could carry. They didn't have much, but it was enough to survive for a few days. When they were ready, they left the barn quietly, making sure not to make any noise that might draw attention. The moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The cool night air felt good against their skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the day. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning the land as they moved. The ranch was silent, the only sounds coming from the distant wind and the soft steps of their horses. Tala rode behind him, her heart pounding in her chest. But she didn't know what lay ahead, but she had no choice but to trust Jack. They moved quickly, taking the back trails as Jack had suggested, staying off the main roads. Tala's mind raced as she tried to keep her thoughts focused on the task at hand. She could feel the fear rising in her chest, but she fought it back. She couldn't let herself fall apart now, not when they were so close to freedom. The hours passed slowly, the darkness swallowing them as they rode through the night. They only stopped for a short break, just long enough to let the horses rest and to eat a small meal. Tala ate quietly, her eyes darting around as she listened to the night sounds. She was on edge, every rustle of the wind making her jump. As the night stretched on, Jack kept them moving, determined to get as far away from the ranch as possible before dawn.
They couldn't afford to stop for too long.
Every minute they stayed on, the land was another minute the riders could use to find them. By the time the first light of morning began to creep across the sky, they had covered a significant distance. Jack felt a small sense of relief, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. The town was still a few days' ride away, and the threat of the riders still loomed over them. Tala rode beside him, her face tired but determined. They hadn't spoken much during the night, but they didn't need to. They both knew what was at stake. As they rode on, Jack couldn't help but glance over at Tala. She had come so far, and yet she was still carrying the weight of her past with her. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing for sure. He would do everything in his power to keep her safe. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like they were headed towards something better. The journey through the night had been exhausting, but as the first light of dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, Jack felt a small sense of relief. They had made it through the first leg of their journey without being caught. The horses moved steadily, their hooves soft against the dirt path, and the air was cool enough to make the ride more comfortable than it had been during the heat of the day. Jack looked over at Tala, who was riding beside him. She looked tired, her face pale from the long hours of travel, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. Her grip on the reins was firm, and despite everything that had happened, she seemed to be holding herself together. She hadn't said much since they left the ranch, but Jack could sense that the fear she had been carrying was slowly giving way to something else. She was beginning to accept the reality of their escape. "We're making good time," Jack said softly, glancing ahead to the path that wound through the rolling hills. "We'll stop soon for a break." Tala nodded without speaking, her eyes scanning the horizon. She wasn't used to traveling this way, on horseback, far from the safety of home. But she trusted Jack. For the first time in a long while, she felt like there was a chance for something better, even if the road ahead was uncertain. As they rode, Jack's mind drifted to the events of the past few days. The riders who had come to his ranch, their faces still burned in his memory. He knew they would not give up so easily. They were coming for Tala, and no matter how far they traveled, Jack could feel the weight of that pursuit hanging over them. He had no doubt that the men would keep searching until they found her. It was only a matter of time, but Jack wasn't going to let that happen. He had made a promise to Tala, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe, if it meant riding for days on end or taking the back roads to avoid detection. Then that's what they would do. Jack had no illusions about the dangers ahead, but he was determined to protect her, no matter the cost. After a few more hours of steady travel, Jack decided it was time to rest. He guided his horse off the path and into a small clearing where they could find some shelter from the wind. The trees around them were sparse, but they provided enough cover to make them feel less exposed. Tala slid off her horse with a soft sigh of relief. Her muscles ached from the long ride, and she was grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. Jack dismounted as well, and they both led their horses to a nearby stream, allowing them to drink and cool down. Jack glanced at Tala as she knelt by the water, cupping her hands to drink. She looked so small and vulnerable, and yet there was a strength in her that Jack couldn't ignore. She had been through so much already, and yet she had kept going, never once asking for anything more than what she needed to survive. He admired that about her, and as they rested he found himself thinking more and more about the life she had left behind. The tribe she had come from, the traditions that had shaped her, and the family she had been forced to abandon. Tala had been born into a world of conflict, and it seemed like no matter where she went, that conflict followed her. Jack sat down on a large rock nearby, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but he knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. They needed to keep moving, stay ahead of the riders who would surely come looking for them. Tala sat down next to him, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She had been so quiet lately, and Jack wondered if she was struggling with the same doubts and fears that had been running through his mind. He wanted to ask her about it, but he didn't want to push her too hard. She had already been through so much. After a long silence, Tala spoke. Her voice was quiet, but there was a calmness to it that surprised Jack. "I never thought I'd leave," she said, looking down at her hands. "Bah, I thought I would stay with my people, no matter what happened. I didn't know how to leave. I didn't know where else to go." Jack nodded, understanding what she meant. He could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of all the things she had left behind. He knew she wasn't just talking about her tribe. She was talking about everything. Her past, her family, the life she had once known. It had all been taken from her, piece by piece, until she had been forced to run. "You've come a long way," Jack said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know it's not easy. But you're strong, Tala. You've proven that already." She didn't look at him right away, but Jack could see a flicker of something in her eyes, a mixture of doubt and gratitude. She had been fighting for so long, and she was tired. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. Jack could see it, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. "I don't know if I can keep going," she whispered. "I don't know if I can outrun them. They'll never stop looking for me."
Jack reached over, placing a hand gently on her arm. "You don't have to outrun them forever."
"We'll figure it out, Tala. We'll find a way." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also with a small glimmer of hope. "Do you really think so?" Jack smiled, a small but reassuring gesture. "I know so." They sat in silence for a while longer, the sound of the stream flowing nearby soothing in its simplicity. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to relax, even just for a moment. They were safe here, for now. And that was enough. After a while, Jack stood up and stretched, signaling that it was time to move again. "We'll ride for a few more hours. We need to stay ahead of them." Tala stood as well, her legs stiff from the long ride. She didn't speak, but she followed Jack as they mounted their horses and continued down the path. The day passed slowly, the sun climbing higher in the sky as they rode through the open land. The horses moved steadily, and Jack kept his eyes on the horizon, always searching for signs of trouble. By the time the sun began to set again, they had made good progress. Jack could feel the weariness in his bones, but he pushed through it, determined to keep going. He knew they couldn't afford to stop for long. Not yet. As night fell, Jack led them to another small clearing. This time they set up camp properly, using the little supplies they had left. Jack started a small fire, and Tala helped him prepare a simple meal. They ate in silence, the only sounds coming from the crackling fire and the rustling of the leaves. Tala seemed more at ease now, her shoulders less tense, and her eyes more focused. She still had doubts. Jack could see that, but there was a resilience in her that hadn't been there before. She was learning to trust him, just as he was learning to trust her.
As they sat by the fire, Jack couldn't help but think about what lay ahead.
They had a long way to go before they would be safe, but for now, they were together.
They had made it this far, and that meant something. They weren't alone in this anymore. And together they would find a way to keep going no matter what. The fire crackled softly, its warm light flickering across the small clearing where Jack and Tala sat. The night had settled around them, cool and peaceful, and for the first time in days there was a sense of calm that neither had felt since they left the ranch. Tala sat close to the fire, her legs tucked beneath her, while Jack kept watch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The world seemed so still now, the only sound the occasional rustling of the wind through the trees and the soft huff of the horses as they grazed nearby. Jack had noticed that Tala was quieter than usual, breaths. She hadn't spoken much since they stopped for the night, and he could see the weight of the past few days pressing heavily on her. She had been through so much, and despite her strength, it was impossible not to feel the toll it had taken on her. Jack wanted to say something, offer reassurance, but words didn't seem enough. They had both come so far, and yet the journey was far from over. Tala had found a small, worn journal in her belongings when they had stopped for a break earlier. She hadn't said much about it, but Jack saw her holding it in her hands now, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages as if they held the answers she had been searching for. He wondered what memories were written in those pages, what parts of her life she had left behind, and what pieces she was still trying to understand.
I never thought it would come to this, Tala said softly, breaking the silence.
Her voice was low, almost lost in the crackle of the fire, but Jack heard the sorrow in it. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and uncertainty. Leaving everything behind. My family, my home. I didn't want to leave, Jack. But there was no other choice. Jack turned to her, his heart aching for her. Bast. He could see the struggle in her expression, the conflict between the life she had known and the new life she was now trying to carve out. He knew how hard it must have been for her to leave her people, even if they had been part of the reason she had to run. She had given up so much to get here, and the road ahead was no less uncertain. You didn't have a choice, Jack said gently. They gave you no choice.
You did what you had to do to survive, and that's not something anyone should regret.
Tala looked down at the journal in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly.
I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered.
I thought I knew, but everything's changed. Everything I thought I understood, it's all falling apart.
Break. Jack stood up and walked over to her, his footsteps quiet in the soft grass. He knelt down beside her, looking at the journal in her hands. Maybe it's not about who you were, but who you're becoming. You've already shown more strength than most people ever will, just by making it this far. Tala met his gaze, her eyes filled with tears that she hadn't let fall until now. She blinked, trying to hold them back, but it was clear that the weight of everything she had been through was starting to break through her walls.
I don't know how to move forward, Jack. I don't know where to go from here.
Jack sat down next to her, his presence steady and reassuring.
You don't have to know everything right now. You don't have to have all the answers.
You're not alone in this anymore. We'll figure it out together. Grasp. Tala didn't say anything, but Jack could feel the quiet relief that seemed to settle over her, like a heavy burden lifting just a little. She was still afraid, still uncertain about the future, but for the first time in a while, she didn't feel completely alone. The fire crackled again, sending a few sparks up into the night sky. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, the night air still and peaceful. For a moment it felt like the world had paused, giving them this rare, quiet time to breathe. After a few minutes, Tala spoke again, her voice quieter this time.
You've been so kind to me.
I don't deserve it. Jack turned to her, his expression softening. You don't have to deserve kindness. It's not about that. It's about doing what's right. And I promised I'd help you. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Tala looked down at her hands, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I don't know what to say. Jack smiled back, breath. You don't need to say anything. I'm here. And that's enough. The night stretched on, and they sat in silence for a while, letting the comfort of each other's company fill the space between them. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Despite everything that had happened, despite the danger that still loomed over them, they had made it this far. They had found something in each other, a bond that neither of them had expected, but one that had made all the difference. As the hours passed, Jack's thoughts turned to the next leg of their journey. They couldn't stay here for long. It was too risky, too exposed. He had planned to keep moving as long as they could, but he needed to find a place where they could lay low, where they wouldn't be hunted down.
We'll leave at first light, Jack said, standing up and stretching.
We'll head toward the town I mentioned. It's still a few days' ride, but it's our best shot at staying safe for a while. Paula stood up too, brushing the dirt from her clothes. How much longer until we get there? Jack shook his head, a small laugh escaping his lips. Hard to say. It's not exactly a straight path, but we'll get there. We just have to be careful. Tala nodded, her face set with determination. I can keep going. I won't stop now. Jack smiled at her, proud of the strength she had shown. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that as long as they had each other, they had a fighting chance. They packed up their things quietly, making sure to leave no trace of their camp. The horses were ready, and by the time the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, they were on their way again, moving steadily down the trail. The next few days were hard, but they continued to make progress, moving as quickly as they could without drawing attention. They kept to the smaller paths, avoiding main roads, and taking care to stay hidden when necessary. The world around them was vast and empty. The only sounds the wind and the occasional call of distant animals. Jack's eyes remained alert, always scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Tala's strength began to grow as well. She still had moments of doubt, but with each day that passed, she became more confident. The fear that had gripped her at the beginning of their journey started to fade, replaced by a quiet resilience. She had come so far, and though the future was still uncertain, she had learned that she could trust Jack, and more importantly, she could trust herself. By the time they reached the town, they were both exhausted, but relieved to have made it this far. The town was small, tucked away in a valley surrounded by low hills. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, a place where a couple of travelers might slip in unnoticed. Jack led them to a modest inn on the edge of town, a place where they could rest for the night. They hadn't seen any sign of the riders for the past few days, but Jack wasn't taking any chances. They had to be cautious, keep their movements slow and deliberate. As they entered the inn, the smell of food and warmth greeted them. Tala's eyes brightened at the sight of the simple meal being served at the tables. It had been days since they'd had a proper meal, and even something as basic as bread and soup seemed like a luxury. Jack paid for a room, and they settled in for the night. The bed felt strange to both of them, but it was a welcome relief after the long days of riding. They ate in silence, both too tired to talk much. As Jack finished his meal, he leaned back in his chair, feeling a moment of peace. "We made it," he said quietly, more to himself than to Tala. "Brask." Tala smiled, her face softer now than it had been in days. "We did." And for the first time in what felt like forever, they both allowed themselves to relax, knowing that for tonight at least, they were safe.